So I have to tell you that after a week like this, my first impulse, I can't say that I'm proud of it, but my first impulse is to hide. And not to hide just anywhere, but to go up to the Maine woods to one of the several camps and shacks that I have access to, so that I might connect with nature. Far away from the painful realities of a busy, sometimes mundane suburban life. And far away from the troubles and contradictions that come from having to confront those issues brought to the fore by the shooting in Orlando a week ago. We know what those issues are. Issues of homophobia, cultural violence, and racism. Issues around the availability of weapons of war to civilians. And the ever-present quandary of conflict. The conflict of ideas and religions. As Ralph Waldo Emerson observed in our reading today, we are so far from the road to truth that religious teachers dispute and hate each other. And speculative men, and we would say women too, are esteemed unsound and frivolous. Unsound and frivolous. Now, as the pastor of a church steeped in this New England transcendentalism, it should be no surprise that I do go to the woods so that I may speculate. I go to the woods to refuel. I go to find a divine unity. And in that way, I am not unlike most of you. It is this aspect of the transcendentalists that most of us think of first, if we think of them at all. And on the face of it, Emerson's essay, Nature, is a prose poem about the glory and beauty of the natural world that attaches this feeling of connection we all receive beholding natural beauty to something beyond us, something greater. And in our tradition, there is this idea of pure, untrammeled nature, lifting us to a higher plane. If not a higher plane of existence, then at least a higher plane of thought. In this essay, we see a division. A division between the mundane world of practicality and pragmatism and the world of enlightenment, with creation always calling to us and to our better selves. When we speak of nature, Emerson writes, when we speak of nature, we have a distinct but most poetical sense of the mind. We mean the integrity of impression made by manifold natural objects. It is this, he says, which distinguishes the stick of timber of the woodcutter from the tree of the poet. Now that's a lovely idea. And for many in our tradition, including myself, it forms one of the cornerstones of the lived faith that we use to make sense of the world. However, to leave this idea of the spiritual power of the natural world, to leave it at this point in its development, is to end up constantly seeking a retreat from the burdens of our day, to hide in the woods. And by doing this, we risk seeing our vacations and our camping trips as our sole mechanism for spiritual fulfillment. We end up taking refuge in a lazy sort of mysticism that puts the holy beyond regular reach and makes it the exclusive possession of hermits living in caves or on mountains. That sort of philosophy, where you have to leave home to find the sacred, goes nowhere and neither proves nor solves anything. After all, we are connected and in relationship with so much more than the birds in the sky and the trees on the ground and the fish in the sea. Emerson reminds us, after all, that in his words, the universe is composed of nature and soul. Two things: nature and soul. Strictly speaking, he tells us, all that is separate from us, all which philosophy distinguishes as the not me, that is both nature and art, all other people, and my own body, must be ranked under this name, nature. Which is to say that nature isn't just what we find on our stroll through the park, but in fact encompasses the entire physical world, including our physical selves, our creations. And the soul? The soul is everything else. Our thoughts, our dreams, our hopes, our creativity, our loves, and yes, our hates too. What we know about these 19th century transcendentalists indicates that they took the implications of that idea very seriously. People like Emerson, Margaret Fuller, the Alcotts, and Theodore Parker saw in this inclusive concept of nature and human nature a reason to take political and social action on issues like women's rights and slavery and war. The nature that they speak of includes everything outside the self. And a true life of philosophy and faith requires an engagement and argument with the world, warts and all. Now, in a perfect, well-ordered world, we could afford that apparent resignation that we hear in the words from the philosopher of Ecclesiastes, that there is a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to kill, and a time to heal. However, this world that we live in is not perfect. It has both good and evil parts, both planned parts and random ones too. And I, at least, am unwilling to say that the nightclub shooting in Orlando, for example, was anything other than an affront to creation, to God, and humanity. While it is true that, as the saying goes, we need to accept the things that we cannot change, there are many, many more things that we can change. Even at first, if they seem insurmountable. There are, I believe, some matters under heaven for which there is never and should never be a time. To truly be people of an authentic religion, we need to come to terms with the evil we see. We must identify it as such, and we must act. We must act to remove that evil. Today we heard from Rabindranath Tagore. We heard him say, "Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers, but to be fearless in facing them." This is a prayer that we must pray as well. Nature, in the large, vast, transcendentalist sense, when viewed through the lens of our faith-filled souls, reveals the power and the pitfalls, the blessed and the cursed parts of our existence. And in that relationship between soul and nature, we find the strength and the convictions to stand up for what we believe. Emerson tells us that all things are moral. All things are moral. We may not have considered it in this way all the time, but our actions are the result, or should be the result, of great intention and thoughtfulness in discerning right from wrong, in the context of a world filled with joys and sorrows, challenges, lessons, losses, and victories, so that we find our place in the world to the point that we realize that that journey to the wilderness is no retreat at all. Our connection to this great creation teaches us and compels us to act out of the strength of our convictions. And we see this in many of the decisions that we make in our lives, both private and public ones, both individual and corporate ones. In our congregation, for example, our convictions, our sense of connection to all, compelled us to become an open and affirming congregation. It compelled us to open a dialogue with people of different faiths. And it will call some of us this evening to attend the Interfaith Vigil on the Common that I announced earlier, in support of the LGBTQIA, Latino, and Islamic communities, and in support of sensible gun legislation. Each person hears the call. Each person hears the call differently. Each of us, as the outside world is mediated and interpreted through our own unique souls, each of us comes to different conclusions, different interests and passions. However, what is important for us to realize is our own interconnectedness, our own place in nature. We may be individuals, but our individuality places us in numerous webs and networks with numerous responsibilities and obligations, webs that are easily torn and hard to repair. The question for us today, as it is every day, is to find a path that honors the whole of nature as much as it honors our individual selves. Amen.